Welcome back to Velshi and Rule. Walmart is deciding to take some form of action in the wake of the shooting in El Paso. The company announced today it is temporarily removing displays of violent video games from their stores, but not guns. A Walmart spokeswoman telling NBC News, quote, "We've taken this action out of respect for the incidents of the past week, and this action does not reflect a long-term change in our video game assortment. We should note that while some argue video games incite violent behavior like mass shootings, there is no evidence to back that up." President Trump did mention it in his comments earlier this week. It seems strange that Walmart has decided to act on that when, in fact, Walmart is the biggest retailer in the world and would know that there's no evidence to back that up. While the recent mass shootings are seemingly moving the gun control debate forward, not even half of gun-related deaths are from mass shootings. According to the Centers for Disease Control, of an average of 36,383 deaths per year to guns, homicides were responsible for only 35%, little over a third. More than 61% were due to suicide. Joining me now is the President Emeritus of the Task Force for Global Health and former director of the CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, Mark Rosenberg. Mark, this is a stat that people who report on gun violence understand, certainly people like you who study gun violence understand, but it sort of gets hidden. It gets sort of shunted aside, that if you really, really want to reduce the sheer mass of gun violence in America, suicides would be a good investment of one's time to figure out.
You hit it exactly, Ali. Let me simplify those statistics, and I think it makes it more dramatic. If you look at the number of deaths from mass shootings from 2000 to 2019, there are, by different estimates, between 600 and 2,000. Let's take the highest number there, the 2,000. 2,000 deaths from mass shootings by guns. From suicide, there were 200,000.
Wow.
200,000, 100 times as many suicides as deaths from mass shootings. So yes, it's a much, much bigger part of the problem. The good news is that some interventions directed at both of these can work to prevent mass shootings and suicides.
Let's talk about, okay, and that sort of gets some of the question there, but when we're talking about suicides, what's the relationship between guns and suicides? In other words, is our suicide rate in America greater than similar populations? Does the access to guns change that?
Access to guns changes it dramatically, and our gun suicide rate is much, much higher than any other developed country. We're off the charts. Guns don't make people suicidal, but they give them the means and the instruments to commit it. And a lot of suicides are impulsive. A large percent are impulsive. People get shocked by something that happens at work, by a breakup of a relationship, by something at school, and they are impulsive. If they have the weapon at that time, they will commit suicide. But if you can keep it from them at that time, for most people, the impulse passes and you can save their lives. So guns don't make people suicidal, but they give them the means to carry it out.
What is the best answer to moving toward a solution to I mean, really, that these kind of numbers you're talking about feels like a public health crisis. What's the biggest answer? Is this about depression and anxiety and mental health? Is it simply about restricting access to guns? What do you think solves this problem or gets us toward a better solution?
I think the discussion about red flag laws and universal background checks is taking us in the right direction, and a very strong direction. Because basically what it's saying is we can remove the guns from people who shouldn't have them, people who pose a severe risk to themselves or to others, without infringing on the rights of law-abiding gun owners. That's the strategy behind the red flag laws. That's the strategy behind universal background checks. And it's not either we do the science and the research and the policy or keep your guns. But if we do the research right, we will find those things using science that both keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them and reduce gun violence, and protect the rights of law-abiding gun owners. It's not either or, Ali. The science can help us do both.
Well, this is what we always turn to you for, because you spent a lot of time researching this. And
can I mention one last thing about the red flag laws? These laws look for people who are at high risk of harm to either themselves or to others. And it turns out that a lot of the criteria that define people who are at risk of being mass shooters, people who have had early childhood trauma, people who've just gone through a crisis in a relationship or at work, people who've been influenced by the social media and the contagion effect, and people who have the means. These four things also define people at risk for suicide. If we start looking for people at risk, if we get everyone to see someone and say something, boy, we might have a huge impact.
You could solve two problems, right? You might be solving a gun violence or gun death problem, and you might actually just be making a dent in suicide and depression and anxiety and mental anguish itself. Thank you, Mark. I always appreciate talking to you. We're always smarter for it. Mark Rosenberg is the former director of the CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. If you know someone who needs help, call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, 1-800-273-8255. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.